So happy to have you here today. Today is a part of our webinar series, one in a regular series that we do for you, small businesses across the state, helping you to navigate. Today's topic is specifically very important, helping us to navigate in difficult times, uncertain times. If you see that clip coming, what do you need to do? How do you manage your business? And we have experts here today from Shepherd Advisors who are going to help us walk us through some of those things. And they will also be providing you with a copy of their Pivot 2020 guide. After today's webinar, we'll get that out to you. Please note that today's webinar is live on Facebook. It is also live on Zoom. And we will have a recording on both Facebook and Zoom for you to watch later on, or if you'd like to share with someone else. We will also receive a copy of the slides from our presenters today, and we'll get those to you as well. So let's talk a little bit about our presenters today before I hand it over to you. I have a couple requests. One is if you have questions today, please put them in the Q&A feature, and we will do our best to answer those questions. If you have questions on content that's unrelated today, if it's loans or something else, please send those to sbam@sbam.org and keep today's questions focused on our content. So let me introduce to you our speakers. First, we have Locke McCabe. Locke is the founder and owner of Shepherd Advisors. Locke focuses on strategy. In 2000, when he founded Shepherd Advisors, his expertise lies in methodical research, sound growth strategy development, and building robust foundations for successful and sustainable growth. I can tell you Locke has been a long-standing member of the Small Business Association of Michigan, been active on our Leadership Council and a past member of our board. Locke, thank you for bringing this and your staff with you today. The rest of our speakers, Michael Holsworth, he's focusing today on execution. Mike is an experienced business leader grounded in the science and the art of increasing marketing and sales effectiveness. He has led branded sales growth at Fortune 100 companies. He's engineered 2 turnarounds and has led revenue growth at small businesses by driving sales and marketing performance with tight resources. Dr. Merv Case. Merv has a PhD in mechanical engineering. He brings to us more than 25 years of experience as a successful entrepreneur, taking industry-leading manufacturing and product technologies from the lab to the marketplace. Simply put, Merv loves to commercialize interesting innovations. We also have with us Ed Holinsky, who will be focusing on culture. And I might add, there is a webinar coming up from Shepherd Advisors on the 20th about culture. Ed is a business and transformation leader who helps organizations accelerate and sustain growth. He specializes in growth technology clarification, leadership development, and culture change. And then last but not least, today with us, we have Joel Solberg. He's CEO of Jet Tool. Joel is a passionate entrepreneur who builds companies. Joel joined, if I'm saying it correctly, if I'm not, let me know, Joel. He joined Jet Tool as CEO in early 2019 and set the company on solid ground for growth. So we're anxious to hear more from all of our speakers. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Locke to take it away.
Thank you, Lori. Let me just square up here and we will get started. All right. Hey, well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking some time out of this lovely Michigan summer afternoon to focus on something that is probably keeping some of you and maybe many of you up at night these days, which is, wow, there is a lot of uncertainty still in the marketplace. There is a lot of moving parts. How do we get through this process? If you are one of those folks who puzzles about how to respond to a future you can't even see, you are in the right place today. This is all about helping you manage the unknown and pivot nonetheless to success going forward. We're going to be talking about a key tool which we are making available to companies all over Michigan called Pivot 2020. And Pivot stands for many things, including planning in volatile and opportunistic times. Again, if this is the kind of planning that will make a difference for you, you are in the right place today. Let's go ahead and get started. But actually, before I do, I want to give a big shout out and appreciation to SBAM. SBAM has been phenomenal during this period, this COVID period, and it's great that SBAM is now bringing content to small businesses to help them not only get through the time that is right now, but also the time to come. And today, you're going to walk away with some tools that are actionable, that are perfectly usable by you and your team to help you get through the future that's coming. Without further ado, you've already had a chance to meet the team. Just another word about Shepherd Advisors. We are a group of guys and gals who really focus on helping companies grow, helping them grow more robustly, more resiliently, in a more sustaining manner. And we do that through optimizing strategy, helping to customize their culture to fit with that strategy, and then operationalizing both the strategy and the culture. It's an awesome group. And let me actually give Mike and Merv and Ed an opportunity to introduce themselves more fully. Mike, why don't you say hey?
Hey, I'm Mike Holsworth. I spent over 25 years involved with food manufacturing operations, both large and small. My particular area of strength is on the sales and marketing side, and I joined Locke and this team at Shepherd about a year and a half ago. And my emphasis is primarily on execution, both sales and marketing, of course, as well as operationally. Merv, what about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Hi, I'm Merv Kars. I am a mechanical engineer by education. I spent 15 years with Ford Motor Company centered in Dearborn and had management positions in research, product design, and also in advanced programs. I got hired away to actually launch a manufacturing operation for a European group in automotive. I ran that for about 12 years before I really got excited and got involved with entrepreneurship. And I had the opportunity over the last 25 years to be involved with the management of 4 startups, 2 in the heavy duty trucking industry, 1 in the material sciences, and 1 in processing. So I just love bringing things to market, new ideas, new concepts, new teams. I love working with smart, innovative people, and that continues today with Shepherd Advisors. And here's one of those magic people, Ed Olinsky.
Hey, thanks so much, Merv. Yes, good afternoon to all of you. I'm glad to be with you today. I spent about 20 years with the Marsh McLennan Companies in learning and organizational development. Worked with the chief learning officer, and together we conducted a couple of major transformations for that organization. Subsequent to that, I led a learning and development function at Mercer for a couple of years, working with the CEO on a major transformation for their outsourced business. And then subsequent to that, I've worked with a number of companies, both inside as an employee and outside as a consultant, to help them transform and improve culture. That's been the consistent theme for me. And as Lori said earlier, just passionate about helping organizations transform by enhancing culture and building capabilities. Locke?
Yeah, enhancing culture, increasing capabilities, improving strategy. This is what we're about. And this all goes into what you're going to be learning more about here in just a few minutes. But before we go on, just really want to give a big shout out and appreciation to our special guest this afternoon, Joel Solberg with Jet Tool. Joel, you've gone through this process, but this isn't your first rodeo working with companies and positioning for growth. Please help those of us attending this webinar get a better feel for what you're up to now with Jet Tool.
Sure, thanks, Locke. So I came on to Jet Tool in 2019 as a CEO, and essentially we're trying to grow a contract manufacturing company that specializes in aerospace. We are now an AS9100 and ISO 9000 certified company that does contract machining and certified welding, typically for aerospace. And our tier 1 customers, such as Honeywell, GE, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce, they love us because we deliver on time, on budget, and on spec tools. And those tools can be in all sorts of materials, metals, composites, even wood sometimes, believe it or not. They're still spec'd out that way. So we can do it all and take it from drawing all the way to finished end item or turnkey tool that can be used by an aerospace mechanic to fix, maintain, repair, and overhaul jet engines, jet landing gear, that kind of thing. Yeah. So we're looking to grow and figure out the future, and that's where I came into the picture, needing some help figuring out if our growth plans and strategies were still sound, and if they would hold true through this COVID-19 craziness.
Yeah, because in your situation, going into the aviation, aerospace market. I mean, wow, talk about a market that's really taking it on the knees here, right? And so you began a conversation with us, what, about 2 months ago? We went through a process supporting you as you and your team went through the Pivot 2020 process, and we're just so grateful for you being here today to help everyone understand, what it was like for you as you and your team as you were going through that. So let's go, if it's all right with you, Joel, let's go ahead and get started. How does that sound?
Thank you.
All right, let's go. All right, so our primary discussion points or topics for today. First of all, we're going to talk about scenario planning as a core methodology to work through the uncertainty that we're dealing with and manage the turbulence that the market is sending our way. We're going to drill down on this very actionable tool, Pivot 2020, which, as Lori mentioned, we'll send you an electronic copy of the ebook, the Pivot 2020 ebook afterwards. We're going to focus also on how you actually implement the Pivot 2020 process in your business, the kinds of value that you will get as a result of implementing Pivot 2020, and then what kinds of next steps might be in front of you you might consider going forward. Without further ado, let's just dive into it. Back at late March, a group out of Ohio State, National Center for the Middle Market, did a survey of second stage CEOs, and over half of them found that the ongoing uncertainty that was at play was one of the most difficult aspects that they were struggling with in managing their business. It was dark back then, right? A quarter of the companies thought COVID would put them out of business. 3/4 of the companies thought that it would reduce sales. And just looking at how do we get through the next couple of months to get through the next year. Fast forward a quarter, the group went out, surveyed CEOs again. 2/3 are still feeling that the ongoing uncertainty in the marketplace is one of the most difficult aspects of their job managing their companies. And I suspect that's why you're on the webinar here today, is because you can resonate with that 2/3 of fellow CEOs who are who continue to struggle figuring out where this is going and how they can position themselves to not only get through it, but really come out in an advantageous position as the new normal finally begins to emerge. And so, most of us are still facing large unknowns, and part of the trick here is figuring out, all right, what are the pathways to manage the unknown? Because you know what, we can't predict the future. How many of us can truly say we know what our markets are going to look like a year from now? But nonetheless, while we can't predict the future with precision, we can begin to empower ourselves to be successful irregardless of what the future actually turns out to be. We can draw upon the principles of scenario planning to envision different futures, to begin to develop strategies for each of those futures. How are we going to succeed in this future, and how are we going to succeed in that future? Then begin to watch for what future is actually coming our way and begin to respond proactively. And this methodology of looking at different kinds of plausible futures, developing strategies, and then monitoring and acting is what the core of this webinar is all about. Ed, you got us started on really focusing on scenario planning, and turns out your intuition was right on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Locke. And it is the time to be doing this for most organizations. This really scenario planning started decades ago with Shell Oil, thinking about big changes in the macro environment and things that they should be considering for their business and doing planning for that. The version we're proposing today is much more rapid and really is driven by the dynamics of our marketplace, which is very different than what any of us have experienced in prior years. And as you can see here, most of the business thought leaders are talking extensively and writing extensively about how to do this well, how to get ahead of things, how to be a half a step ahead of your competition as you go through this volatility and uncertainty, because those companies that really are willing to think, be rigorous, make decisions, and invest in the right places, even though you may be cash strapped, come out well ahead of companies that just go with the flow and make indiscriminate cuts across the organization. So what we want to focus on today is certainly the big picture, but to help you get quite granular on how you might do that in a systematic way with your team. I happen to lead a group for Vistage of CEOs, and those conversations focus extensively on what's next, what are the different options we're looking at, and how do we plan for that and do it on a rapid basis to be able to prepare for any of the things ahead of us. Some of the benefits that we found in working with organizations of doing this process and doing it on a rapid basis is that it helps you to move faster than your competition. None of us know what it looks like around the corner today because there isn't a playbook for this, but as things start to get a little clearer, and we hope they will over the next few months, you're going to be a step ahead by having done the work and be able to move at a faster rate. You'll also create a planning discipline in your organization that's going to serve you well through this crisis and afterward, because that discipline brings the team together in a way where you can do much tighter planning and be much more disciplined about the execution than other organizations are, and that you would have been prior to this. It generates meaningful team conversations, so it creates a platform to have discussions where you'll sometimes have things come up informally, and it really helps you to coalesce those, sift through the best ideas of the team, and then narrow that down to the consensus of where the team thinks you're most likely to end up. So those options are important to take a look at. It's important to look at the upside, downside of those, and then most likely scenario in your case. It also helps you to take what limited resources you have, the cash that you have to work with today, as limited as that may be, your capital investments, and focus that in an appropriate way where you can capitalize on what's ahead of you in the short term. And then the last thing on here, which is certainly not the least, is that it helps your team psychologically to do meaningful work through a high anxiety environment. You're going to find that your team will be more confident. They're going to be more systematic in the way they work together, and it's going to be contagious for the rest of the organization. That confidence and that doing something as opposed to just waiting for something to happen is really going to set a good tone for the organization, because they're going to feel productive and feel like they're doing things that matter. And Joel, I'd love to have you share with us what your experience was and how it might attract with some of these things I talked about, please.
Sure. So I completely agree. There's a lot of discipline that was throughout this process that I think helped us to maintain focus, as well as dive deeper than we would have on our own with our normal planning processes and our normal management system. Certainly surfaced some key things to do and tied them to our survivability and tied them to our eventual bounce back. And I think that was really neat because it brought up some new ideas. And then when it comes to limited resources, we're always fighting with, hey, what's it going to take in time, cost, and all those things, and trying to bring that to the table and know that we only get to really spend that a few different ways to really prepare for the future. That was nice, having confidence come out of this process to know we were spending those time, money, resources in the right way. And then certainly I agree with the last comment, which psychologically, emotionally, I think it really took people out of a reactive state and put them in that proactive state, and even at times a place of logic, which is sometimes rare in a chaotic environment. We were able to systematically bring them out that emotion and really future take hold of it and take some control of what we could control, and then accept that we don't have control in everything, and just do the best we can to mitigate that.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Joel. Now, Mike, if you'd be willing to talk with us a little bit about your experiencing doing something similar, it would be helpful, please.
Yeah, there are really three phases that companies go through in dealing with a crisis. I'd like to walk you through them through the lens of my own experience with a different crisis, that being 9/11. The first phase is really all about dealing with the immediate issues, and typically they're primary business needs or people. I mean, that was certainly the case with us. After the attack, of course, the airline industry was grounded. So we had people traveling, and I had to figure out how do we keep these people safe and get them back home. it also coincided with the peak cash needs for our business. So almost immediately, our team was worried about cash flow. We certainly weren't alone. These were fairly typical for businesses at that time, as they are for businesses at this time. And there really is little air left in the room to think about anything else, nor should you be thinking about anything else. But that does change. And eventually you can come up for air, and the team begins to contemplate, well, now what are we going to do? And I will tell you, this was a real struggle for us. We had really strong personalities on the team. Some were optimistic, some were pessimistic, but all were strongly advocating, this is what we need to be doing. And we finally had to come to the conclusion, you know what? Nobody really knows what the future is going to be. But while we couldn't predict the future, we could certainly plan for different plausible futures. And that's exactly the track that we took. The first thing that we had to do was really assess the business, where it was. It's not that the business changed that dramatically, but the environment certainly did in the post 9/11 world. And as we began to work our way through that, things became clearer to us. And it was as if we were saying, okay, if these things happen, that's probably the best we can hope for. But man, if these things happen, that's probably the worst we're going to see. And here's the more likely way that things are going to unfold for us. And we could develop an action plan, if you will, for all three of those scenarios. And then after we got that done, we said, well, this is great. The team was developing more confidence that we can confront whatever's going to come at us, but how are we going to know what's coming at us? And so we really had to put a lot of time and effort into what are the indicators we're going to be looking at that are going to tell us what type of future is emerging. And one of the interesting things here is we had to go outside our comfort zone, because the historical way we looked at our business wasn't going to cut it. What we really needed to understand is how dramatically was the consumer going to change in a post 9/11 world. So we had to look at other indicators that would begin to tell us that. So we did have to bring new things to the party. And then after that, it really is all about the rigors and the discipline of following those indicators and what actions they're telling you to work towards. But it's also important to understand what decisions need to be made when, because all business has to, or calls for at times, making decisions with less than perfect information, but man, that's on steroids in a crisis. And so it was critical for us to make sure the team was focused on the right things, of course, but also at the right time. Now for us, it ended up being the best case scenario. There certainly were some industries, hospitality being one, that were adversely affected from 9/11 for months, but the consumer bounced back pretty quickly. So it was the best case scenario for us, but we had planned for that, which was great, because we didn't do reactionary things early on that might have damaged the business. And it helped us not just maneuver through the crisis, but actually come out that much stronger on the other side. So there really are three different phases here. In the first phase, you don't have the time or the inclination to think about much else, nor should you. And eventually the future does emerge and your team begins to adapt and plan to grow from there. But what we're really talking about today is this middle phase. It's that phase when the storm is still very much brewing. And what we find is a lot of companies are very reactionary. And the more in control you can get of this, the uncertainty does not go away, but the more in control you can get, not only are you going to weather the crisis better, but you're going to come up that much stronger on the other side. Locke?
Well, thank you, Mike. You know, your story was inspirational for the whole team as we then said, well, hey, Mike, how do we take what you went through and put it into a bottle, put it into a structure that companies all over the state can begin to use to manage through the unknowns, to deal with the turmoil, and to plan for a future that we can't even begin to see. And your inspiring perspectives, Ed, you're saying, hey, this is scenario planning. Let's make it actionable. Let's make it real. Let's make it doable for companies. All boils down to this tool, this toolkit really that we have. We call Pivot 2020. Planning in Volatile and Opportunistic Times, and it is an ebook. It is an ebook that we'll send out for you to you. It is designed for immediacy of use. Within this ebook, there are 4 integrated tools that we're going to go into in detail here in just a minute. It is an interactive ebook, so you can write on it, you can rewrite it, you can send it around. It is designed for teams to either do it themselves or engage, folks like us to help you get through it more effectively and expeditiously. This is all about creating and getting to and creating actionable outcomes, key decisions to key actions, and you'll pick that up here in just a few minutes. And then finally, we designed this in such a way that it can be a living management resource. You can use this month after month. You can go and update it quarter after quarter as you get better information. And you can go through this Pivot 2020 tool set to improve your planning discipline and improve your business going forward, regardless of what the future sends our way. As I mentioned, there are 4 integrated tools. It starts with assessing the current business. It's a bunch of questions that are designed, short answer, bullet point answers, focused on aspects of demand, of supply, of your business as a whole, and of your current view of the future. And then once you have that current state assessed, you sort of know your starting position to then begin the second step here of developing scenarios. And what you'll hear is that we really dive into a best case, a worst case, a likely case scenario. And then we accompany that scenario development process with a financial model. We can supply you with a financial model, or you, of course, can develop one yourself. But it's all designed to really help you get a sense of cash flow and P&L, particularly over the next 12 months, because we need to know where those dang cliffs are. We need to know when we're going to go below the lines that matter and plan appropriately. And then finally, as you have your scenarios and you understand the cash flow and P&L implications of them, then you can begin to really look forward, monitor the leading indicators that help you understand what future is coming your way, and then take decisions here. And what I'd like to do here, Joel, is just simply turn it over, get your perspective here as you went through this process. How was this for you?
Sure. So I think the overall process, I think, was really helpful in that it was systematic and thorough. And the nature of our planning and everything we want to do, we want to get right to an action plan and start doing something. And I think this process forced us to slow down, look at every part of the business in even more of a comprehensive way than just a SWOT analysis. It's not simply just looking at what about this part, what about your current state, what about your customers, vendors, resources, and all that. We did that, but it also just was somewhat sobering because we really had to look at ourselves in the mirror and sort of say, well, who really are we and who might we become at the end of this? And are we comfortable with that? And really decide if we're willing to do everything it takes when those action plans distill out at the end of it. So I think it was really, again, a systematic process that I appreciated each one of the phases. And even though I was somewhat impatient throughout some of those steps, I wanted to just get moving and get to the end. I think that was critical to our success in identifying our possible courses of action for those possible futures.
Yeah. And Merv, you went through that process with Joel and I. I know there were some things that you were thinking about that Joel and his team might be thinking about. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yes, an evolved process. And I just wonder how your team, after had a chance to look back and seeing how the thing went, how your team feels, whether it was worth all the effort. Were there too many steps? Did they think it flowed logically? And what's the overall perception that they have of the COVID 2020 toolkit?
So the team engagement has gone up tremendously, and I use the word intimacy as well, in the sense that before we were all a team, we communicated well, we had weekly planning sessions and quarterly and yearly, part of our EOS system. But what happened here was, it brought us together as a group and really allowed us as a team to meld a little bit more, be a little more honest, I think, and sort of throw off any worries about what's the boss think and all those things and just really get down to business. And again, going through all those paces together and systematically going through each one of those steps, it really allowed us as a team to come together and then flesh out our futures and have then buy-in and empowerment at the end of it. And I think that's, without this system, I could have made some calls and shots right at the beginning, but it would have been me making those calls and shots. I wouldn't have had that team engagement nor the empowered individuals then who really understood why we might be making changes, why we might be going after a certain type of business and all those things that came out of it.
Yeah, and Joel, it was terrific working with your team. We encourage you to pull together a pivot team. Help the participants here understand who was on your team.
Sure. So I basically picked the stakeholders in each area of the business. So I picked purchasing came on. We had a CFO, finance, and then operations. We had a couple individuals, be it floor manager, operations manager. We had estimating and quality. All of those had a stake in our eventual, outcome, the action plans that would come about because of this project. And so that was important to me to get that whole team there so that they could be part of it and really engage with it and be part of the solution so that they could run with it, because there's so much going on. I didn't want to be the only driver at the end of this.
Yeah. And, the reality is you couldn't have been the only driver, because even just getting through the first tool, the assessing the current state, would call upon your whole team to respond. On the demand side, we looked at markets, we looked at customers and the competition. On the supply side, we talked through supply chain issues, labor issues, other kinds of factors and opportunities that would impinge or create opportunities for you on the supply side. And then, we also pushed questions around culture and leadership. And Ed, you were instrumental to integrating that into this process.
Yeah, thanks, Locke. It is important that businesses start with their purpose and their values. And if those aren't right, to do a refresh on those to determine what it is they do want to stand for, just as Joel said. You might think of this as a crucible that we're going through, and I think things will get forged that may be good, may not be good. And if you're intentional about it and really determine on the front end what you want to stand for, and that means what is your purpose, what's the higher calling or order for the business that you adhere to, what are the values that are important that you'll call out and reinforce in the organization, and then how do the moves ahead of you support moving toward those goals or the purpose for the organization. That gives you your North Star or your compass as you think about the different options that are ahead of you. So it's not just about making money, it's about bringing people along with you emotionally so that they're motivated to run a great business along with making money. And the leaders really have to buy into that. As Joel said, it can't be just the CEO speaking on behalf of the organization. It has to be a shared goal, shared mission in order to execute it effectively. And that will lead into better innovation, by having folks engaged and all working together, keeping their heads up and thinking about better ways to generate revenues or to become more efficient as a business. So a lot of good things will fall out of that. A lot of people leave that to chance. We recommend that you don't, give some thought to this, because it's one of the most important elements of getting it right.
So yeah, innovation. So let's talk about that. Innovation is a word that scares people. Companies don't do a very good job of innovation. But innovation doesn't mean you have to invent the next iPhone. There's a thing called incremental innovation, which is where you sort of think of ideas as you go through business day by day, and then you can implement those and be very successful. So when your team completes the assessment tool that we're going to talk about in more detail, you'll start to understand what your company is good at and what it's not so good at. And the team will start to come up with ideas as to how you can improve that team, how you can improve your relationships with your customers, how you can compete better with your competitors. And you start to identify areas for improvement as you go along. So the whole concept here is to list down those ideas and put them into fruition. And you'll find you'll start to affect the bottom line very quickly. So as you go through this process, think about innovating as you go through as well. Thank you.
Thanks.
And especially as that innovation starts to come to the fore, then it becomes even more important and easier to start looking at the future. And let's just dive a little bit more into the actual tool itself. It is set up, as I mentioned earlier, as an interactive ebook. And so there are leading questions with spaces for responses. Most of the time, the responses are going to be in bullet point form. It's designed to be doable. It's designed to be something you can spread amongst your team to get done. What matters here, of course, is the quality. And with each part of the assessment, we ask not only specific questions related to a subject matter, but we also ask about the implications and the actions that come from your responses. And Joel, just as you and your team went through this, was this too much?
No, I think this was a critical step and one that shouldn't be taken lightly. I think when you talked about the future earlier, we can't truly know the future. So we're always making predictions. You could call them assumptions about the future, right? And so going into this, if we just look at those questions and want to write down the answer like we always have done or know, we all know it, right? Who our business, how we do business, all those things. There was a lot of assumption of what we already knew about ourselves, and then add to it this assumptions about the, and we really had to just start articulating things and really questioning and maybe asking the questions twice to really say, hold on, is that an assumption or is that fact? And really try to figure out what's what. That what's critical here is that disciplined approach and asking those questions when normally we just know the answer. We don't need to ask that or spend time on that, right? That's an easy go-to thing. When you run your business, you know it, right? But having to step back and go slow and ask those questions, I think was critical to then get the output that we desired.
Yeah, and that output really formed the basis of going to the next step, which is developing the scenarios. And this process of developing scenarios is fundamentally about confronting uncertainty and confronting the unknowables by envisioning, how different uncertainties might create different plausible futures, and then within those futures, how you're going to succeed in this. And so we go through a process of envisioning different futures, and then identifying which scenarios are going to give, which futures are going to give you the best scenario, the worst scenario, or the likely case scenario, and support you in developing a crucial story that says, if this future happens, then here is our response, and this is why we are choosing this response. We iterate it with the third tool, the financial model, make it tighter, make it more viable, make each scenario tighter and more viable, and go forward from there. What we did with you all and your team, Joel, is we asked, what are the core uncertainties that are really likely to, depending upon how those uncertainties turn out, shape your future one way or another. And two of the uncertainties that you came up with was a combination of, well, we just simply don't know when COVID is really going to get under control and people are going to be flying again. We just don't know that, and let alone all the other economic ramifications from whether COVID's under control or not. And then what you also didn't know was how rapidly your customers would need you to be on the ball, because generally you're finding them needing you to be just in time, even more quickly, having the right products at the right time, and that whole time frame shortening. And going forward, is that going to get even tighter, or are folks going to get a little bit more relaxed? And depending upon how that turns out, it has significant implications on your business. And we went through this and said, okay, well, in some instances, let's look at a future in which COVID is basically under control, and your customers are really asking you to be on the ball, and if you're too slow, you're going to lose business, and so that's your future number two. And then we said, well, what happens if COVID actually isn't under control, and we end up in, not only are people not flying, but economically, we end up in a deep recession or even a depression. And at the same time, your customers are demanding on-time delivery because their survival is at stake here. And that was future number 3. And then we looked at future number 1. What happens if COVID is now under control and your suppliers are more relaxed? And then, of course, future number 4, where your suppliers are really relaxed, but that's because there's not a lot of business, and they don't need stuff quite so quickly. And as we articulated those different futures and the implications for your business, then we took the next step of saying, well, which of these futures are most likely, least likely, and would be worst case or best case or likely case, and you all decided that the worst case would be future 3. If future 3 showed up, so basically COVID's not under control, and your customers are demanding, next day service, that would be really hard for you. And your best case scenario would be, basically COVID is under control, people are flying again, and and your customers are asking you to step it up. You all decided that would be a best case. And then what you thought is a likely case was, a combination of future 2 and 3, a little bit more future 3 than future 2. But, this all provided a framework then for you and your team to think about scenarios, not based upon your personal preferences or hopes and dreams, but of distinctly different futures. And, Mike, I know you had a question about Joel about,
Yeah, Joel, we did not have this particular tool when we went through it. And it certainly seems like it would have been helpful to us. I'm just curious from your perspective, how well did this help you guys move from that assessment phase to transition into the different scenarios?
Sure. So I think the key here is that we all had input on the assessment. We all understood what are the likely implications to our customers. And so that was where the speed to delivery came about, as being a critical concern, a critical opportunity, and then also how much of COVID was in control. And I think having everyone gotten to this point together through that assessment, and then really having to throw a dart almost at this and pick, where do you think this is going to land? Where do you think it's going to be our best case, our worst case, our most likely? And the take home and with the point of clarity here was, we don't get to control COVID. We hope that it gets under control. That could go either way on the spectrum, no matter whether it's best case, worst case, or likely case. But no matter what, the takeaway was, we got to get more efficient and faster. Our customers are already demanding it. Now, with every dollar being carefully spent, they're going to demand it even more fully, because they're looking for the same exact thing we are: predictability. They want to win and gain back their market share. They're not going to mess around with people who can't keep up or cause problems for them. So that was call it a distilled point that the whole team was able to see. No matter what scenario, we got to look at efficiency and get a little faster and change our mental paradigm from weeks to days, and really just get on the ball and figure out how to do that with improved processes and all those things. So.
Yeah. So this was a very empowering process for you and your team, as it sort of forced you to focus on the things that you'd have to do irregardless of which future is coming your way. And we went through the process with the worst case, the best case, the likely case, to describe that future, get to some headlines that would help you and your team know that this is the future that is here. And then we work through the strategic moves you'd have to make to position yourself to, not only succeed, but really thrive in that particular kind of future. And then drilled it down to specific actions that you could take to improve your competitiveness and prospects for growth, and also reduce your business risk and extend your survivability to get to and get through that kind of future. And we work through these 3 different scenarios. And my question to you, Joel, is, we went through 3 scenarios. That's a lot of work, but was it worthwhile to have these 3 different views of the future?
Absolutely. So the 3 possible futures gave a sense of, gave us a sense that the future is still undetermined. One, that this is a dynamic thing, and also gave us a sense of empowerment of, hey, as this evolves, we've got a couple options, courses of action, of where to go. And that felt empowering, just to know we got some options as this unfolds, And now we just got to know how and when to define which direction it's going, right? But I think this whole process of looking at those three different futures for our company was enlightening as well as sobering. You know, we normally play to win, and our growth goals are always, you know, our best case is we're going X%, or, you know, X amount of sales or X amount of customers, whatever it be. And then our worst case is we do last year's, you know, we meet last year's revenues, we meet last year's targets and all that kind of stuff, right? And it doesn't have to have that shift from our team and realize, you know, this future, even our best case, and in our case, I don't mind sharing, our best case was we have a year like last year. We're profitable, we can do this, you know, we meet last year's targets, right? But what does that mean for your likely, and what does that really mean for the worst case? It starts to get really scary in a sense, right? You have to confront that. And I think that's where I say it was enlightening as well as sobering. It's everyone. There's no easy cake. There's no free rides. You know, our best case scenario is a lot of work. Our likely case is a lot more work, and our worst case is everyone's coming, and we're shedding a lot of tears and sweat over this next year.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, as you went through that process, we moved from the qualitative description of each of the scenarios to the quantitative financial description. We used the model that Shepard put together to help companies do this kind of scenario modeling, and you know, looked at P&L and cash flow. We then got to a place where we could put the side by sides of the P&L, revenue, EBITDA, net earnings under, you know, worst case scenario, likely case, best case, and then we drill down to the cash flow. And, you know, how much money were you starting with? Where were you going to end up with? If you needed to put new money in, what was that going to have to look like? Your monthly minimum and your monthly maximum. And of course, you know, that was crucial to know the minimums, because, you know, we need to know where the cliffs are. And Merv, I know you were, you know, very, very attuned to this process as we were working it through with Joel and his team.
Yeah, I'll look at the next curve, Locke.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So cash is always king. So Joel, I'm interested, whenever you got a chance to see the first numbers of the cash flows for the scenarios that we put together, how shocked were you? How did it affect your path going forward? And secondly, how effective do you think the graphs were in communicating the cash flow information to your team?
So I think seeing the info is tremendously helpful, and that's the things. And having it visual allowed our team to see the trends and see the overall picture. And so I would say, as a tool,
Hey Joel, I'm afraid you're breaking up. For right now, we're going to go ahead and keep going. You know, I think where Joel was going, and this was certainly what Merv, what you and I saw, was it got everyone's attention, especially when they realized where the bottom line was going under the worst case scenario without any adjustments. They began to realize that they had to make some significant changes because when they looked at the revenues were pretty tough, even under the best case scenario.
Yeah, I think also, Locke, you know, looking at the numbers is one thing. As CEOs, we look at numbers all the time, but for a team to see it graphically really tells the story, and seeing the curves the way they were, I think, got the story across.
Yeah, and then once Joel had the scenarios together and the financial aspects of that, and there were a couple times when he went back and tweaked the scenarios because of the finances. He had to adjust the scenarios to, quite frankly, stay above the line, and he had to have those conversations with his team. But once they got all that, they were then able to move to the fourth tool, the monitor and act tool. And the central principle of monitoring and act is, if we are clear about what our potential scenarios are and the futures that those scenarios come from, we can begin to look at leading indicators at the macro level, at the industry level, at the company level, and see what's coming down the line. Look at the kinds of indicators that give us a good clue as to what the future is going to be like 3 months from now, 6 months from now, and then watch the trends, see which scenario is actually, which future really is coming our way, and therefore which scenario we should be focusing on, and then finally using that intel to make near-term decisions and actions to, basically say, hey, if it's a worst case or the best case scenario that's framing up, what do we want to do to position ourselves today to be in the right place and to be able to pivot effectively to meet that future as it comes. And as we went through this process with Jet Tool, he's coming back. Hey, Joel, welcome back.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries. It's a choppy connection this afternoon. So we just simply, if you would, you went through the process of identifying leading indicators, and I think you're beginning to use them. Is that right?
So the process yielded some, I think, important leading indicators that weren't on our radar before. I would say that most of our KPIs and most of our indicators were all past based, and so this leading indicators is certainly helpful. It's certainly that's out there, but for us to actually drill down and figure out what matters to our future and what signs are, so to speak, and how we'll recognize those things, those leading indicators have been tremendously helpful. Certainly sobering still. We're still, seeing those numbers, and they're not as pretty as we want them to be, and no macro level, and so our industry local level, and then our internal leading indicators. And between all those, that's giving us those signposts, if you will, to tell us which direction we're on. So that's been a very helpful part of this, and certainly an ongoing thing that refreshes and keeps guiding us as we go.
Yeah, and I think you're using this in your regular monthly meetings. Is that right?
Yep. So we use entrepreneurial operating.
There must be a storm somewhere that's taking Joel out. Oh, he's coming back. I'll give him a second here.
We got turbulence, Captain.
I think so.
I apologize. That's acting to everybody. I apologize about that.
Joel, I think you were just saying how your team is using this now.
Yes, we're incorporating it. So I have now those form into me, where I'm finding them on my own and adding them to our to track those indicators. If they're weekly, so be it, but typically monthly, and allow us to start to use that to almost shed some light on the future. It's going to tell which direction we're going to do the scenario starting to actually emerge.
Joel, I know unfortunately the connection continues to be a little garbled. Let's, if we can, let's go ahead and get to Q&A. We've covered a lot of territory here in the last hour. We you all are probably thinking about, oh, gee, how do we get started? Where do we begin to go from here? And there's a couple key steps. The first one is simply to decide to proceed with using the Pivot 2020 tool. And the first step of using it after you make the decision is to pull together your team. And then finally, we encourage you to ask for support. To use the Pivot 2020 tool. If you want, we're happy to, Shepherd Advisors, we're happy to spend an hour giving you an orientation, running you and your team through this. If you'd like it, we can give you the financial modeling that it's an Excel spreadsheet that you and your team can use, you and your CFO can use to model out the different scenarios. We can provide a reference case for you to use as an example. And then, of course, if you would like additional facilitation from us to help you and your team, come together and go through the process more successfully, that's awesome. Give us a call. And if it's important to augment and supplement the Pivot 2020 process with additional strategy, research, culture related work, that's awesome too. We can talk about that. We're all in this together, and we're all in a place where we want everyone to get through this successfully. Without further ado, Ed, if we can, let's turn to you for questions.
Yep, we haven't had any come through, Locke, which leads me to believe folks are just processing all the information that we provided, and perhaps we'll have questions when we reconnect with them as a follow-up to this. So.
Okay. Well, one of the questions.
Sorry, I just heard someone, I think.
No, it was just Laura. I was going to say thank you very much. My question was going to be, where do we get started? And Locke had the last slide in there that helped us with that. So thank you.
Thanks, Lori.
Well, actually, Lori, the best place to start is really to, basically say, hey, this is a big deal. And it's going to take some forward thinking here to be able to move through this successfully. Even though our plans, by definition, as soon as they're written, are technically useless, the process here is indispensable, and that's where the real value comes from. And it turns out actually a lot of the plans actually work. And with that, Lori, thank you again for having us on your webinar, allowing us to share about scenario planning, about developing a proactive pivot process, and using the Pivot 2020 tool. Joel, we're very grateful that you could join us this afternoon. And we just really appreciate you sharing your insights about what it's actually like to use this and to go through this process as a team to create the future that you want, despite the fact that right now, for many of us, the future is a little bit of an unknown.
Yes, listen, thank you so much. Thank you, Locke, Ed, Mike, Merv, and Joel for presenting with us today. This webinar is recorded. Locke will be sending me the slides. We'll get you those slides as well. The recording will be available both on Facebook and on Zoom. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you all participating. All right, take care.